What is happening, everybody? Hope everybody's having a fantastic whatever day it is. Happy quarantine. Coming up on, what is it, halfway through May now? Yeah, it's fantastic. I hope everybody's out there practicing your social distancing. Whatever. Anyway, so for you guys tonight, I wanted to open the topic on Boost. A lot of you guys have had comments, questions, or have otherwise asked me, what about my, and then insert car, and then insert how much boost can I run, or what's the best supercharger, or what's the best setup, how much can my car take? All of that I'm going to get into tonight. It's going to be a little bit one-sided this evening. I'll be able to catch up with a few of you guys as I'm going through this, but I don't want to get too far off topic, but chances are I will, so disregard everything I just said, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, let me say what's up to Sherrod checking in, first in for the night. I like it. Donald Swaller, say what up, Beat, what up, Donald? All right, so basically, here's how the conversation typically goes. First of all, it might be 392 guy saying, man, listen, I want to keep up with that Hellcat, or I want something that's got a little bit more zip to it. What's the best supercharger option that I've got? And one of the things that will invariably be brought up is the fact that you can just seemingly take any LS combination, throw boost at it, and go run whatever fantasy number that you think is out there. I'm going to start with this topic on LS stuff. It doesn't work like that. Go ahead and go grab yourself some boat anchor of an LS out of a Tahoe, throw boost at it to your heart's content, and then when the thing scatters to the four winds, wonder why the internet lied to you. And lied to you so freaking much that it basically turned what you thought into a reality. It's like a belief into reality thing. Look, for any of these engines to work, they've got to be massaged a little bit. You've got to understand that it doesn't matter if it's a 5.7, an LS, Coyote, 6.4, Hellcat, it doesn't matter. They all have to be prepped and set up to run a specific cylinder pressure or a specific heat range. They also have to be able to say, it's not really a boost thing, it's a power thing, but more importantly, it is a heat thing. So, ring gap becomes an issue. Anyway, setting the thing up for failure is where most guys get it wrong with Mopars. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. Typically, when we're talking about cars that quote unquote don't like boost, we're talking about the 6.4 liters. So let's just go ahead and jump in the middle of that. The reality is that yes, the 6.4s do have a bit of an issue when it comes to ring gap on their on the pistons. It's basically kind of tight. My understanding is it's somewhere around, well, it's tight anyway. It's like 18 or 19 thousandths, which is a little bit too tight. You need to be significantly higher than that, somewhere around 7 thousandths per inch of bore. It's going to put you close to 30 thousandths. Basically, what's happening here is you've got an engine that is designed to be extremely efficient, naturally aspirated. And it is a little bit over-engineered in that way. And so, because of that, it's going to run tight ring gaps because it's trying to get as much seal as it can possibly get based on the heating of that cylinder that it's going to get. This is getting long and boring, and I get that, but you've got to have a little bit of understanding of the whys behind this before I start getting into the hows and what works. So, because of that tighter ring gap and because it sits higher up on the piston, it's going to be exposed to a little bit more heat, can't dump heat into the piston. It can tighten up that ring gap really quick. That's why early on, 392s were popping left and right. Also, it doesn't necessarily help the fact that it's got 11-to-1 compression with a large piston. So there are these things that you got to consider before you start throwing all your hard-earned money at basically, your pride and joy. You don't want to start throwing boost to the thing unless you truly understand what's going on. And that's another thing too, by the way, guys, if you're going to get into boosting something that didn't come from the factory with one of these contraptions sitting right on top of the engine, make sure that you educate yourself on the topic first and foremost. I can't tell you how many times I would have a conversation where it would go something like this. I want to throw boost at my car. Okay. What kind of boost do you want? Well, I want to make 600 horsepower to the rear wheels. Okay. What kind of boost are you looking for? Are you looking for instant boost? Do you want something that carries better on the big end, like a Pro Charger? Looking for a custom turbo setup? Yeah, talking to customers, it was just, I want boost. Boost! I just want boost. And there was no understanding of it. It was as though I was talking to a caricature of a car owner. Like, I kept waiting sometimes for somebody to just bust in with cameras and go, ha ha, gotcha. Unfortunately, it never happened. And if you do yourself the favor of educating yourself on the subject, at least you'll be able to have an understanding of what your goals may really be for that car. So anyway, let's talk about the different types of, well, lack of a better way of putting it, boost. All right, so anything positive displacement is going to have instant torque. You're going to have torque on demand all the time. That doesn't necessarily mean that the engine is going to be real snappy. It's not going to act like a high compression, naturally aspirated engine. It's going to act, if it's something like a Hellcat, which only has like 9.5 to 1 compression, it will act like a really big engine with low compression. It'll be fairly snappy, only in that you'll get this big rush of torque whenever you put your foot in it, but you won't ever get that pop to it that you're looking for with like a high compression, naturally aspirated engine, like the 392, so to speak. So that's the initial driving impression of those cars. Again, it's got a lot of torque, but not a lot of snap. The problem with these types of superchargers, if you're thinking about going after, say, an E-Force on your 5.7, which I really like that combination, by the way. If you're going to go that route, though, just understand that, number one, you're adding a ton of weight to the front of that car. Doesn't really matter in for practical purposes. But you'll hear that argument get thrown out there. Well, it's so heavy. Well, let me tell you how heavy it is, first of all. And, well, I'll let you be the judge of that. If I were to hand you this IHI 2.39 liter, it's 2.4 liter supercharger, which just means that every time it makes a full rotation, it's going to pump 2.4 liters of air into the engine. If I were to hand you that thing, it's roughly 80 odd pounds. If you start to add the nips and the bips and the thises and the that's, it comes out to right out about 100 pounds. So yeah, it adds about 100 pounds to the car right on top of the front tires, where you would say, oh, it affects handling, it does this, it ruins the balance of the car, and it's just not the right way at GT500. I thought that was the next greatest thing in the world for on track or whatnot. That's got an actual roots blower. It's not a twin screw, it's a roots blower on that car. So for practical purposes, it doesn't really affect handling realistically. It doesn't really affect the balance of these cars because, let's face it, an extra 100 pounds, when the thing already weighs over 4,000 pounds, it's not going to be that big of a deal. Plus, you've got instant torque right when you want it to overcome any weight that you just threw at the car, which is going to be part of this next, cloud of discussion that we have tonight. But anytime you add power, you're going to be adding weight to the vehicle, whether it's in beefier suspension components, in some cases, well, drive shaft, but this is an inertial load here. But you've got all these other things where you're potentially going to be adding weight to the vehicle. So just know that any weight gain is going to be part of it comes with the territory. Just think of it that way. But the downside, let's look at the downsides of what a positive displacement supercharger brings to the table. Because, everybody loves, oh, it's instant torque, it's this, it's that. Okay, well, yeah, it's the heaviest of the group, basically, in terms of the different methods of boost. Number one. Number two, well, let's be honest here. It's a little bit inefficient. And for X amount of boost, on the back half of the track or on the far right side of that dyno chart, it's going to make less power. You've got a heavier inertial load. And what that means is the big rotors that are in there spinning, that takes torque to actually twist them. Well, the faster you want to twist something heavy, the more power you've got to have. So it has a higher parasitic loss and doesn't quite make the power up top. And that can be a bit of a problem. To that point, they also get really hot. They heat soak, which on the front end isn't that big of a deal, but the act of compressing the air also heats them up as well. Again, they basically turn into a big heater if you try to overdrive these things. True of any of them, but mainly true of these. But aside from that, they've got some great upshot. Number one, they are the cleanest of all the installations. They look factory, even in poorly designed kits, they look factory as hell. And really, there aren't any bad ones anymore. Instant torque, forget about the weight, don't worry about it. Nobody's going around road courses in anything, much less a Challenger or a Charger, with a positive displacement supercharger. And last but not least, the big thing you got to worry about with a positive displacement supercharger is your transmission, because you have to remember, you have torque on demand. It is now going to be able to produce, instead of say 250 foot-pounds of torque at, say 2,500 RPM, when you start to, really roll into the throttle at lower RPM. Now, when you're actually, by the way, when you're overcoming the inertia of the car being at a standstill is what I'm talking about here. Now that transmission is going to have to cope with a significant amount of torque gain. You might be sitting at half a bar, in other words, 8 to 10 PSI, right as you shower down on it, and immediately that transmission is going to be feeling the difference. That is like a side issue that you're going to run into with a Roots or with a, any positive displacement supercharger. The transmission is going to get really taxed. As well will, drive shaft, axles, U-joints, what have you. CV joints in this case for the Mopars. So keep that in mind. If you got street tires, though, there's no big deal there, because, and that's why I saved this kind of issue for last, because it's at the very end of the conversation. Because if you got street tires, they just go up in smoke. Your tire is your fusible link. So you run it on street tires, who cares? It just becomes a fun car. That side benefit makes the best noises out of all of them too. So from there, sticking with the supercharger theme, let's get into the centrifugals. Now, this is kind of a funny thing for me. I've got a love-hate relationship with centrifugal superchargers. On one hand, I love them because, just in general here, not talking about application specific, just in general, I love them because you can pretty much dial in your power number and you don't have any huge penalty down low in terms of launching the car. In other words, we're talking about drag racing. They're much the same as a turbo in that, yeah, you can always put a smaller pulley on one of these and get more boost. But because the centrifugal is more efficient at higher RPM, that amount of power that you gain on the big end just gets bigger and bigger and bigger with X amount of boost. It doesn't matter. It will always outpower one of these things, number for number, and of course, discharge temperature for discharge temperature. Which brings me to my next point. Because a centrifugal is an engine-powered turbo, it's going to be more efficient at higher RPM. All you need is an air-to-air intercooler typically to get air temps down into a reasonable level. Not to say that an air-to-water doesn't help, which is basically what all these modern positive displacement superchargers have. But it's a bit more simplified and a bit more, it's an easier interface. Let's just put it that way. When you've got an air-to-air intercooler that just bolts right in front of your radiator, it's a lot easier than having to plumb water lines and do all the things that make the air-to-water intercooler so much of a pain in the ass. Now, granted, yes, air-to-water is a lot more efficient, but it weighs significantly more too. Brings me to my next point. Centrifugal systems in general are significantly lighter. than the fuck was that? than a centrifugal, than a positive displacement supercharger. So there's that. Now, in terms of, are there downsides to them? Well, yeah, there's a few. I mean, the cool thing is that you get all this rush of power on the big end, and the car is very predictable in how it's going to accelerate. Coyote Mustangs, by the way, are a riot with centrifugal superchargers. But the downside is that when you've got a heavy vehicle, you never really feel that supercharger start to work because you've got a heavy vehicle. And because that supercharger doesn't really start to act like a supercharger until on average around 3,500 RPM or 4,000 RPM, it can feel basically a little lazy. Or if nothing else, it just doesn't feel all that strong. And then all of a sudden, it really starts to come into its own, but it's linear. And since the boost is linear, your torque curve is pushed to the right on that dyno chart. So yeah, it's there. The feeling is kind of there. It runs good. The car is going to run good, but when they're heavy, like one of these things, it's really more academic than anything else. And what I mean by that is that it looks good on paper, but the driving experience just doesn't really equate to the number that you see on the dyno. And I've driven probably a dozen, maybe a dozen, and some like a baker's dozen at least of pro-charged 6.4s. And the thing that I always came away from the experience was, I know what this car made on paper. I'm the one that dynoed the car. Hell, I may have even made some changes to the tune to just button it up to get the vehicle ready for the introductory delivery. The what we would do with the customers, they still do is you basically introduce the owner to his car again. Get him to drive it, have him understand. We got a Skeeter in here. I think I got him. Anyway. And the one thing I always came away with was that it would feel good, but it never felt snappy. It never felt like one of the Hellcats or one of the Magnuson supercharged 5.7s where it would just be bam, and it would just pin you. They never felt like that. And because of that, value for dollar, it's the least expensive of the crew. And for all the reasons why it should be the least expensive. And last but not least, the other downside when we're really diving into positive displacement, we're talking about Mopars here. The packaging sucks for the Mopars. There's just the way that the engine compartment is laid out in one of these LX or LA platforms. There's just not a lot of room to finagle and place things. So you end up with a air intake laying across the top of the engine. And I mean, if you've got an SRT, at least you've got a hood scoop to help funnel some cold air up there. But the reality is, I mean, it's just not the most awesome looking thing. It's not something you're going to be all wowed over at the local car show. Although it is pretty cool to see some kind of a huffer underneath the hood, right? Here's something to consider when, let's go stock for stock here. Because pro charging is typically the most popular boost method for 6.4s. It's also the most maligned when it comes to scattering 6.4s. A lot of that was tune related. And a lot of that had to do with guys that, quite honestly, had a fairly decent tune, but were just beating the living crap out of those cars, which you should be able to do. But the reality is that they were just pinching ring gaps and popping. There was just no way around it. So, it's just an extra step that you have to take. It's an extra step you should take regardless. But with Mopars, it's just so expensive. It's a pain in the ass. And to do a full-on teardown on a 5.7 or a 6.4 is a nightmare because the heads have to come off to get the cam out. Obviously, be doing that anyway if you're pulling the engine apart. But guys just don't want to spend that money. And when other folks can get away with a little bit more, lighter weight platforms, that's another thing. The heavier weight, higher load, higher cylinder pressure, which is higher cylinder temps, pinch of ringland. The cards are stacked against you when you're starting to talk about these Mopars. So you've got to know the whole, and the reason why I'm bringing all this up, guys, is you have to know the entire landscape that you're working within. You've got to know what types of gremlins you're going to run into, both the obvious and those issues that may not be so obvious. Those are typically the problems that end up costing you in the long run. So, damn mosquito's like a ninja. Now it's a dead mosquito, so now it's a sushi. And that leads me to my next topic here. So because Pro Chargers were significantly more popular for the 6.4 early on, you had a lot of tuners that didn't know how to speak Mopar trying to tune those cars. And if you ever look at the timing tables in any of the Mopars, you would swear that they were leaving, I don't know, 40, 50 horsepower on the table because the timing is so low. So these guys would take known values for an LS, throw them at the Hemi. And what I mean by known values, I'm talking about air fuel and timing. More to the point, timing here, but and they'd end up popping these things. And it's because they just simply didn't know. They saw a timing number that was very low and thought, oh, well, yeah, we're leaving all this power on the table. Look, if you put that to 22 degrees, the same way you do an LS at 10 or 12 pounds of boost, you'll be fine. Probably not the best idea in the world on 93 octane to throw that kind of timing at that level of boost on one of these cars. But we'd see it. And you'd see it, unfortunately, happen quite a bit. So you've got to also take that into account. Nowadays, with the proper tune, there's guys running 7, 8, 10 pounds of boost on a 392 with really no problems whatsoever. In fact, several of them are making 550, 570 to the rear wheels on stock tires. I know guys that go out and beat the living hell out of a couple of Chargers in literally that exact that setup. And basically, it's just a D1X race intercooler, injectors, tune, send it. I mean, fuel pumps, send it. So. Which leads me, we'll circle back around on that centrifugal supercharged thing. I know there's a lot of guys look at the Pro Charger as the de facto supercharger, and it should be. I mean, it's a good deal, easy on driveline parts, easy-ish to tune. The main thing is that. Just know that the driving experience is not going to be as rich with one of those superchargers as it would be with, say, the 2650 that comes with that E-Force kit. Again, I wish I got paid to prop them up, but listen, credit where it's due. So next is going to be turbos. I saved turbos for last because a lot of folks, number one, are intimidated by the whole thought of turbos because there is no kit, so to speak. I think Helion might be putting one together. I've seen some folks talking about turbos on 5.7s and 6.4s, things like that. And there's some guys that have been able to pull it off, but let me just bring you guys into the spectrum of reality here. The fact remains that it is a pain in the ass to make a clean looking turbo setup on this platform. Not saying it's impossible, but I just haven't seen one that just blew me away yet. One that was reliable and dailyable. That's the other side of it too. You just don't see that level of fit and finish with turbos, mainly because there's just really nowhere to put them in this thing. Again, the engine compartment just does not allow for it. So at least not in a kind way. So there's that kind of stuff you got to deal with. But all in all, if you look at it for what it's worth, the idea of the turbo is that, yes, it is the most efficient. You will make the most power if it's done right per pound of boost. However, it'll be the most complicated to put together. It will probably be the most laggy of all of them, especially if you go the route of going rear mount turbos, which some folks have done. And it'll make a number, and it'll haul ass on the street. I mean, you want the throttle, and it comes online, but it's a little bit more lag, not a lot, but it's noticeable. And if it's noticeable, you got to mention it, right? So those are some of the issues with the turbos. And nobody makes, that I'm aware of anyway, a kit that you could actually just install in your garage and call it good. Whereas an E-Force, you could kind of do that. It's going to be easier and a lot cleaner to install something that is basically just removing a part and putting on a part than it is going to be to purchase something and try to make it work in a space that is already occupied by other stuff. So again, some things to consider when you're looking at different directions that you want to go with boost. Just remember that when it comes to the Mopars, reinventing the wheel isn't probably the best advice that I would go with. And not right now, we're only talking about cars. The trucks are a completely different story altogether. Lots of room, do whatever you want with a truck. But for the vast majority of folks that are hot rodding things, it's going to be a Charger or a Challenger, and it's going to be one of the platforms that really does lend itself very well to a positive displacement supercharger, which is what I would suggest, but only just over a Pro Charger setup. But let me catch up with you guys real quick. First, I want to say, hey, Shawnee, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Saying that Texas sun is getting so hot. Yeah, it is. Definitely starting to get us all noticed around here. Let's see who all's in. Oh, bear with me just a second. Brian King saying, what's up? What's up, man? 1320J saying, what's up, Mr. Mason? What's up? Got the arm flex. I like it. Christian McVeigh saying, like the beard, dude. Got the flex. Thank you very much. That is pure laziness on my part. Sherrod saying, wow, great 2018. She is a 15, brother. Brian King saying, what's the safe amount of nitrous for cams, 6.4, ported heads, manifold, stock, bottom, in? It depends on your tune, my brother. But based on what I'm looking at with you, man, keep it fun, keep it simple, keep it around a $125 shot, and you'll be happy. Start getting to 150 shot. Problem is that you're going to be well above, and I mean well above what your transmission is going to hold. So don't worry about your engine. Again, you're going to want to look at ring gap on that thing and close. I mean, nitrous is going to need more ring gap than anything because the hit is right now. And so the pressure spike is there. The temperature spike is definitely there. And if you've got a 6.4, obviously, you know what's going on with that compression ring. So I would kick that thing open to probably 30 thousandths. And from there, you can pretty much rock whatever boost you want. I mean, whatever nitrous hit you want. Engine side, within reason, of course, but in other words, 150, 175, maybe. But again, I mean, you're up against issues with your transmission. So run a progressive on 150 shot, run a progressive on 125 shot. You really can't feel the difference between the two. Trust me on this. And let her rip, and I think you'll have a good time with the car. Let's see. Symphonic saying, the reason I got my second gen Coyote was for boost later on. I hear the Gen 2 are best for boost even over the Gen 3. They're all good, man. They are all good. Blackbird 98's checking in saying, what up, Professor? In fact, I've drawn, what's up, Blackbird? I've driven all of them with boost. They're all fun, man. And that's the other thing too, man. Guys, y'all got to remember one thing, man. I've driven all of it. Every ounce of them, man. I mean, I've had fun in 300 horsepower, 250 horsepower cars and trucks. I've had fun in 1,200 horsepower cars. I mean, listen, to me, just make sure you're having fun. And they're no fun when they blow up, number one. And number two, they're no fun when you just keep throwing money at them. You know, you want to be able to get them out there and enjoy them. So, keep that kind of in your quiver, so to speak. But especially when it comes to nitrous on the Mopars. And again, HP 70, hard stop at about 535, 545 pound-feet of torque on a Mustang dyno. That's going to be around, say, 570, 580 to the rear wheels on a dyno jet. Around that number, especially on that hard hit, that's where you're going to start having problems with that transmission starting to slip. So let's see. Shawnee's saying, I took a hard look at boosting my 392. I was right into Hellcat money, and it would have been slower and less reliable. So I traded it onto Hellcat and haven't looked back. Sean, we're going to get to that point here real quick, but he brings it up at a good point in the conversation. Money. So let's talk about money. When we're looking at money on these things, the tough part when I'm spending money on something for a car, one of the toughest parts for me is it's got to at least have a sense of purpose and a sense of refinement to it, so to speak. I don't want to just pop the hood and see something that looks like it was cobbled together, even though it might have been cobbled together. You know what I mean? So I don't know what I'm talking about. I want it to look the part. I want it to at least be durable is really the other side of that argument. Reliability is a huge issue. So the money aspect is what ends up stinging me. And it's really what is the best value per dollar? And I think you guys know where I'm going with this. Best value per dollar is going to be positive displacement. No doubt about it. Richest driving experience gives you the experience of having a much larger engine, and it is your investment, the return on your investment, which is the boost, right? The power is always available for immediate withdrawal. You can always tap into that boost whenever you want with a positive displacement supercharger. And that's the reason why all the OE manufacturers, if it's not a turbo, are hanging one of these positive displacement superchargers on top of their engines. And it goes back a long ways. I mean, we're talking about, in the modern era, we're talking about the Lightning, which kicked it off, then the Termi Cobra, and then you get into, the Buicks with their supercharged V6s and the 3.8s from Ford also. I mean, you start to see all of this stuff. That's the way you get a bigger engine out of a littler engine, is you add positive displacement to it. So because of that, there are reasons why we keep seeing these superchargers pop up. It's not because they're inherently more efficient, and it's not because they're cheaper or this or that or whatever. They're just more familiar to be able to be installed, or at least they were back in the day, by guys that were used to installing intake manifolds, because all stuff like that is just a belt-driven intake manifold. That's it. So anyway, getting back to it. Let's see. Saying props to the 392. It's a great stock, torquey, fun, responsive engine. Yes, it is. 1320J saying I'm thinking about doing just that. Sean saying I've had 2 root stall supercharged cars, 03 and a Cobra and a Hellcat. Love the throttle response. I could never go back to a Senti. A lot of folks have said that too. Is there is, and that's what I'm talking about. That immediate return on your investment. That is an intangible, well, it is tangible and it's actually measurable, but it's one of the things where partial throttle, you've got boost. Wide open, you've got boost. Low RPM, boost. High RPM, I'll give you some boost up there too. Need to get out of somebody's way really quickly, got plenty of boost for that. That's kind of the point of that positive displacement supercharger. Again, it's always on and it's always there. Let's see. Thank you again, Sean. Appreciate the contribution to the cause. Saying I've also had an EcoBoost turbo car. Pretty fun. Requires some brake boosting to get it out of the hole, however, but it does have that fun boosty feeling. So there's that. The one thing that the turbo has over all of them is theater. I mean, yeah, there's some theater when it comes to a positive displacement supercharger. Most of it's in that supercharger, just shrill whine that it's got. So there's that. But in terms of driving, when the boost kicks in, I mean, that's a phrase that you'll hear a lot of people talk about, especially a lot of casuals that they're not into cars, but they like cars. they like riding in them or whatever. When you floor it and you go, wait for it, and then it just comes on out of nowhere, seemingly. That's the stuff of legend for folks, you know, and the fun thing about turbo, you take a car that doesn't make that much power, but it feels like it is a screamer just because it goes and it comes on out of nowhere. It's like just a completely different engine, like you just whole new engine fired up and started running underneath your foot. Anyway, that's a cool part about turbos. So if you're into that sort of thing, then that'll matter to you. Let's see. Shawnee's saying, what gas does that GMC truck like? He's talking about little Sierra, which is the new addition to the fleet, which is a 1972 3/4 ton GMC. That thing's sucking down 93 octane. So that's what she is enjoying at the moment. Funny story on that too. So I went to replace the fuel sending unit. The guy had bought a new sending unit for the truck, and he goes, yeah, the gas gauge doesn't work, or it'll sometimes work, but other times it doesn't, really couldn't figure it out. Well, I figured out why that was. Just my luck. So the guy replaced the sending unit. The sending unit, and so to that point, so the sending unit is self-grounded on the gas tank on those trucks. It doesn't have an extra ground strap. So I took in the gas tanks in the cab. So I took the old, because I had the old sending unit, I took the old sending unit and I plugged it in, and it was working fine. The gas gauge, I could sit there and make it go up, down, up, down, up, down. And I got to looking at it. I went, oh no, it's a brand new sending unit. Pull it out, and sure enough, the float, it's a copper float. It's on the other side of the car, actually. It's a copper float. The copper float was full of gas. It literally had just filled up full of gas, and of course it's going to hang there. So it looks like there's no gas in the thing. So I was going, oh, this totally sucks. So the funny thing is, the reason why what was happening is it would sometimes work, sometimes it wouldn't. What was happening is that when the truck was low on fuel, the gas would dribble out of the float, and it would dribble out enough to where when you went to go, let's say you let the thing sit overnight, it didn't have much gas in it. Then you would fill it up. Well, it's cracked. It's not like it's just in two pieces, because it's kind of like it looks like a little whiskey barrel, actually. And it's cracked on like the end over here. By the way, I'm all carved up from working on that truck. I love it. Hey, it's not yours unless you bleed on it, right? So anyway, what would happen is that it would take a little bit. In some cases, it just wouldn't happen at all. The float, it would never submerge on the side that it's cracked. So it's working. Like technically right now, I've got a gas gauge, but after driving it and, going around corners, things like that, it'll get a little bit of slosh. And then once that slosh gets into that float, and if the float dips under the level of fuel, now you got yourself a freaking anchor, and it just drops. So anyway, that was what I was working on today, along with trying to cure the vapor lock issue. So I'm working with a truck that's practically 50 years old, and the truck's been worked on. And like I've said before, at some point in time, somebody spent a lot of money on that truck, but unfortunately, the people that were working on it had a lot that they didn't know. Like, damn, they didn't know what they were doing. So I'm going in and I'm fixing and curing a lot of sins there. And part of that is trying to fix a vapor lock issue, which is weird because the truck does have a return style fuel system. 71, they started that. And two, I've been able to move some of the fuel lines away from the headers, but I've still got to order headers for it, which, I still got to get the transmission fixed, which is a big thing. I can't do anything until the transmission's fixed. But on that point, I did put a tack in the truck. And got bored the other night. It was raining. I happened by the local auto parts store. They had an old ass, not a Suntac, but just even the packaging was yellowed. And so I was going, I'll just hook up a tack and see what kind of RPM this thing's turning going down the freeway. Yeah, come to find out, the truck's got 430 gears in it. And it came from the factory with 354s. And this is part of the thing where you just go, what? They never changed the speedo gear. So the truck still thinks that it has 354s. So once the truck is re-geared with 354s and it gets the, a 22 or a 2400 RPM stall and transmissions fixed and all that stuff, it will actually have a very accurate speedometer. So anyway, one other tidbit on that truck too, by the way, it has the absolute best alignment out of anything I've ever driven. Out cruising down the road, you just kind of back away from the steering wheel and it just motors dead straight. So anyway, I'm having a lot of fun with it. Like I say, that truck needs a lot of work. I've got cab mounts on the way. I've got to get new bed pads for it. Probably going to reline, just put all fuel lines in it. I've replaced almost all the soft hoses on that truck so far. I've got like 4 more, or let's see, one for sure, one return that's kinked, one up the feed line to the carburetor, and the feed line at the tank where it feeds the rail down the frame. I gotta replace those too. So yeah, me and 3/8 fuel line are pretty tight right now, dude. But anyway, the thing's a lot of fun. And one thing I will say to that, the 400 in that truck is pretty stout. That engine's been out of that truck, and I don't know if it's got a cam in it or if it's just been rewarmed over or whatever, but it's real torquey, doesn't spool up that hard though. It's got that crappy little, it's not crappy, it's actually a really good carburetor. It's got a Rochester 2-barrel on it. I think it's rated at like 358 CFM or something stupid like that. It's snappy, if nothing else, and I can't wait to get a transmission in that thing and re-gear it to where it actually makes sense a little bit going down the highway. But that's the truck update, and I was out putting around. I can, even with the transmission being broke, I can putt around in the truck, and I can go down the freeway with it just fine. And just 3,500 RPM going down the freeway. But anyway, let's see. Shawnee's saying centrifugal on an old school Fox body was pretty good because the engine had a lot of torque inherently with the light platform. That's right. In fact, I ran, you guys may not remember this, Power 9 superchargers, BD11 compressor. That was my favorite street blower back in the day. Could really only make about 10 pounds of boost with them, but they had a very aggressive impeller pitch, and they had mid-range like you would not believe. So anyway, that was a fun one just for farting around on the street. I wouldn't say it was a race blower because it was not that, but it was a fun one on the street. Vaga is saying, supporting the lives, B. I love it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. B5B saying, what up, B Mason? What's up? Got the fist bump. I like it. Boat 392, why are early Hemis not considered Mopar? They are considered Mopar, my man. Yeah, anything out of Dodge, Jeep, Chrysler, all of that is going to be Mopar, man. So you might be thinking about, if you're talking about early Hemis, you might be talking about the DeSoto Hemis, which was still basically Dodge anyway. So yeah, I mean, they're all considered kind of part of that Mopar family. Same way that AMC, even before they were Mopar, was later on considered to be part of the Mopar family. They were trading parts back and forth and all of that. So that's where all that came from. Zephyr RD saying, what up, Professor Mason? Got the fist bump. I like it, saying, I know it's boost night, but would you mind giving SRT8 Chally alignment preferences? AutoX and Daily Drive, all across Daily Driver, Michelin PS4s, 275 squared, power stop pads and rotors, dot for fluid. So for autocross, I would probably go 2.5-ish, 2.25-ish up front. And I think the car comes with 1.5 in the rear. I'd probably go 2 degrees in the rear. And for the street, I would leave it, whatever the stock values are, leave it at that. You may bring the rears in just a scotch to make it a little bit livelier. But I wouldn't, that's about as far as I would go. So I'd say maybe 2.25 up front, 2 in the rear for autocross or closed course. And for the street, I just leave it stock. I think it's 1.5. 1.5 and 1. I could be wrong on that. And I don't know. So there's some guys over at Motorsports Ranch that run Challengers. They run Hellcats. They run Scat Packs. And I've never asked them what their setups were. But I think that for those guys, there were 2.25. It was 2.25 and 2 in the rear. Now, just remember, though, that 2 in the rear is going to make it a little bit squirrely, and you're going to burn through tires. So use that at your own risk. You might want to bring that back down to like 175-ish, somewhere in that range. Hang on. What tire did you say you're running? Michelin PS4s? 275 squared, yeah, I'd still want to give you. The reason why I would go with a little bit more camber is because it's heavy, and I would try to get that. You're going to be compressing suspension quite a bit. What the hell? Vesca saying my 08 RT Charger feels sluggish when I hit the throttle. Okay. Don't know to tell you that one, brother. Shawnee's saying, minus DA all day tomorrow. Cool with a tailwind. Track closed. Grr. Shawnee is not happy about that. Hat Ready's saying, thoughts on Pedal Commander. I love Pedal Commanders. Man, look, I've installed them. I've had them. BMWs and Mercedes. Look, let me tell you something about Pedal Commander. You get a lot of the benefits of a tune in terms of just the throttle snappiness without voiding your warranty. It's a cool way to be able to customize the feel of your vehicle. And look, I know a lot of guys go, it's not any extra horsepower. Well, yeah, it is, because if you think about it from this point of view, if I move my foot 3/4 of an inch on a pedal and it's slower or faster than stock, then I've removed or added power, right? Just based on throttle throw. That's not to say that I gained power, but what I did is I'm commanding more power with the same foot throw, or I'm commanding less power with the same foot throw, which is cool as hell. So you can give yourself an eco mode, which is something that I used to do. You can give yourself a very aggressive mode, which will make the car very, very responsive. To me, that's kind of cool. It's a way to tailor make the driving experience. And it's got an advantage over tuning in that you can sit there and just thumb it out. You can do that stuff on the fly with a Pedal Commander. So my thoughts on them, I love them. I've owned them. I recommend them to guys. And for the guys that are and gals that just want that extra pop underfoot or want the freedom to be able to chill their vehicle out if they're going on a long, like for example, go on a long trip, you don't want the pedal to be that responsive. You just want to be kind of a little bit lazy, give it a little bit more throw before it's going to downshift. You've got that option, makes the car a little bit more chill to drive. Again, you can tailor make it to whatever you want. So again, they're not paying me to hype them up, but I'll tell you this, I've always liked that product, and I always thought that it was weird that modern cars didn't come with that type of a feature as stock. So anyway, Shawnee's saying that he loved his pedal commander. 1320's asking, should I use butane with my fuel? I can only get ethanol-free 91 here in Wyoming. I have a 1964 1320. You can. I just don't know how much benefit you're going to get. With it being a 6.4, it really kind of does rely on octane. They all ride the knock sensors pretty hard, but in this case, look, I'll tell you this. You can run a little bit just to make sure that you're not going to run into short-term knock retard. But just understand this, even on 93 octane, my man, it's a Mopar, and they go into minor freakout mode for seemingly no reason with their knock sensors. They are extremely sensitive when it comes to knock sensors. So just know that coming into it. Not that it's the same vehicle, but my truck, when I would data log it, my truck would go into short-term knock retard, literally cruising down the road, no load, no anything, at 65 miles an hour. I could just sit there and data log it and just, you know, looking at the data log and go, oh, wait, it's pulling timing again for no reason under the sun, just because it's Mopar. So what can I tell you? But, yeah, if you're data logging and you're looking for a difference in short-term knock retard, just remember that you're not going to eliminate it fully, typically by throwing butane at it, but it won't hurt anything. Let's see. Maincool, I think I'm saying that right, says Helium makes that twin turbo kit that goes under the car. I've seen it. The only downside that I have to that is if you look at it, and this is with you looking like at the front of the car, like through my eyeballs or the front of the car, right? Like the headlights. Those turbos sit right here, and the air filter, the filter element is right there underneath that car. Basically, it's not very user-friendly. I mean, yeah, take that thing to a drive-through car wash and see what happens. Yeah, so there's that to consider. It's a packaging thing. So yeah, they make it. Yes, it exists. There's also rear mount that's out there. I've seen them mounted underneath the hood. Although not very well. I've seen a lot of stuff, but not that it was a bad effort or anything. It was just, you know, guys trying to get by with what they had. And that arguably that was a developmental car, so, you know, cut them some slack. But the fact remains, it makes it really tough when you're looking at turbos as an option, and that user friendliness just does not, it didn't work in there. Hang on just a second. Ken797, thank you very much for the contribution to the cause, man. I like that. I appreciate it. Let's see. Getting back to it. Shawty saying 1320, what kind of Challenger do you have? Alex is saying, I was also looking at the undercar Hellion kit that mounts near the cats. What do you think of it, B? They claim low 600s on 5 PSI. Yeah, the claim of low 6 bills is pretty legit. I mean, you're gonna get there, no problem with that setup. Again, for me, it has more to do with just the fact that it's not all that user friendly, at least not so far as I've seen. And not to say that you can't make changes to it, and you know, there's got to be some workarounds there. I'm just saying that until there is a truly viable OE quality, and I'm not saying the Hellion's not quality, it's just, it's not OE clean. It's not OE engineered. They're trying to make something work that, you know, that really wasn't designed for it. And even, I mean, I've seen folks go so far as, you know, they remove the cats, replace the cats with the turbos, but you can't really put a big turbo back there, so they're going with twins. I've seen them tucked further up near the cradle. I've seen a bunch of pretty interesting solutions to turbos. And again, until somebody can really sort it out, it's going to be belt-driven stuff for me. But that being said, you know, I've seen the rear mount stuff work pretty well, and just in terms of making a number. But man, you've got to deal with all of the plumbing and the issues that come with the rear mount, although some will argue that it is actually a little bit easier. So you just got to spend more on piping. Shawnee is hanging out with 1320. Let's see. Leroy is saying, made the mistake of getting 5.7. Bro, don't say that, man. Listen, one of my all-time wish list project cars is to build basically just a really pissed off 5.7. And keep in mind, I mean, you're not that far away from where the truck is, and you got trucks running mid-11s right now, so naturally aspirated. So there's plenty you can do with a 5.7. Here's the fun thing about the 5.7. It responds well to modifications because it comes so neutered from the factory. That 370 horsepower is really more like 400 just waiting to be let go. Go with better headers or a full exhaust system for that matter, unless you've got like the Scat Pack exhaust system on it, which is the same as a 392. But there's that option. Tuning is available. There's more upshot to that because that 5.7 is designed to run on 87. Throw something in there that's more optimized for 91 or 93, and you can pick up some power and throttle response there as well. There's just a lot of fun that you can have with a 5.7. And I know a lot of folks are going, yeah, but the 5.7 is the slowest of the group, this and that. Look, guys, okay, so yeah, it might be the slowest of the group, but there's nowhere down from the Mustang. There's nowhere down from the Camaro. They are all looking up at the 392. At least that's been my experience, stock for stock. And it also happens that if you want to have some fun, have the noise at a fraction of the cost, go with the 5.7. And that's why I've been saying I would love to do just a nasty build on a 5.7. I think it would, well, I know for a fact it would get a lot of folks' attention. Tried saying, when I said, wow, 2018, I was getting ready to type my car and accidentally said, sorry, 2018 392 built motor, Maggie, shooting for 12 pounds of boost, going E85 and meth. Be careful with the meth, especially with a Maggie. Let me tell you why. If you are relying on meth injection for octane, you have to remember that you could potentially run into a distribution problem with positive displacement. You're also going, because you're assuming that you're spraying into the throttle body and through the rotors, basically. What happens is you've got an atomized liquid that is hitting a rotating nucleation site that is spinning at about 14,000 RPM. So you've got globs of meth that are being slung up against the case. You've got, basically, you're going to run into a distribution issue. The reality with that statement, though, is that I can't say that it is a flatline problem. In other words, like guaranteed issue that you're going to have. But I will tell you this, the only time, one of the few times, I'm not going to say the only time because that is a lie, but one of the few times I was legitimately scared. It only happened a few times at the shop. One is when I thought I blew up a Hellcat on the dyno, it was a number 8 misfire scatter thing that Hellcats do. One of the times, though, was a customer that had a 6.2, I think it was a 6.2, either a 6.2 or a 5.3, transplanted into a Jeep, the 4-door Jeep, with a Maggie sitting on top of it. And when I was doing the data logging, one of the things, I would do the initial data log on all the vehicles, and one of the things that I found on that Jeep was the injector duty cycle spiked at 100%, and it was relying on a snow performance meth injection to make up for the rest of the octane and the fuel. This is just the shit that you get showing up at the shop, man. So I had one of my techs riding with me, and we were looking for a fuel pressure drop. Well, the fuel pressure spiked at like 65 or 70 and then fell to 45. I immediately jump out of the throttle. Anyway, I thought at that point that it was injured, if nothing else. And no, everything was fine. But I can't say that I would have ever trusted that setup. And I only say that because of just the puddling that I've seen. You just, look, on a progressive set, here we go again. Okay, with a progressive setup that runs on injector duty cycle, Snow Performance has got some great kits, and they absolutely work. But I would highly suggest running that through the lid, the way that most guys do with the Hellcats. And let me rephrase that, with the way that most guys should do with the Hellcats, the way that we started doing them quite a bit at the shop. That's the direction that I would take with that. But just be real careful with meth injection, man. I'm not the world's biggest fan of that stuff. And again, it all has to do with distribution at that point. Let's see. Gen06 saying, hey, Mason, love your channel. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. First time messaging. Thank you for hanging out with us, man. Appreciate the contribution. Saying, I am from Vancouver, Canada, and have a 2018 Hellcat wide body with 11-inch wheels and 305s. What's the widest tires I can safely put on them? Well, it depends. Not all 305s are the same width. 315 is the kind of the agreed to widest tire that you would want to put on those things. But there are some 305s that are pretty wide. I think Falcons run wide. Mickey Thompson will always run wide. Nittos are pretty straight and true to their width. But anyway, Aturos are wide, I think. But anyway, no, I'm sorry. Aturos are narrow. So a 315 can be as wide as a 305. So I wouldn't go above 315. Your contact patch is going to start looking a little hokey at that point, especially if you tangle up with one of the wider 315 variants. So there you go. 315 is my answer on that one. Thank you for hanging out with us, man. Appreciate it. Christian McVeigh saying, I think the obsession of horsepower these days is crazy. Some people think anything less than 700 is weak. Please remember the days when an 07 GT 500 made 540 and broke the internet. Just have fun. Look, I remember 05 and made 500, you know. Look, let me just tell you guys that I got a little bitty spider that is right here. I don't know if you can see this guy. Anyway, I'm about to turn into freaking Spider-Man. So here's the thing. Modern cars are obnoxiously fast. Boost is so much easier to control nowadays. We're not talking about old ball drive Paxtons that you had in the 60s. We're not talking about Roots style superchargers that are inefficient and engines that only turn to 4,000 RPM. We're talking about modern power plants. And I got to tell you something, the modern power plants so far and away overshadow the engines of the past in terms of efficiency. It's not even funny. But so does technology in the transmission. In terms of efficiency, the entire powertrain is far and away more efficient. But here's one thing I've learned with this truck, and this is something that I really started to learn with my wife's Camaro, which is a Gen 3 TBI car of all things. In fact, I'm going to take that car out tomorrow and just have a little fun with it. But here's one of the things I've learned about my truck and the Camaro, the older vehicles. And when we're talking older, we're talking this truck's older than I am. Those big inefficient engines are just super torquey, and they offer up a driving experience that you don't get with modern cars, because the older cars, and now I'm really talking about the truck, or any of you guys that have anything that was built from 1977 and before, you're driving those vehicles. You're not along for the ride like you are with some of these modern cars. When I drive that truck, I am an active participant in the conveyance, okay? I am 100% integral to that vehicle going down the road. With the Hellcat, you don't really quite get that, or with the Camaro or the new Mustang or what have you, you don't really ever get that impression. But when you're talking about, oh, by the way, almost forgot, squirrel. Anyway, I weighed the truck today. The truck weighs exactly 4,300 pounds with a full tank of gas. Anyway, but the thing is, when you're piloting one of these things, there is no isolation from the road. There is no separation from you, the machine, the road, and whatever is in front of you. Everything is very apparent and everything becomes very real and organic with the older cars. And that is where the huge disconnect lies for me. I like my Hellcat a lot. I'm amazed at how awesome this car is, and I completely understand its place in history. It's the reason why I got the car that I got. It's the girl on the cover. She's the cover girl for the 2015 Hellcat. Anyway, for all the reasons to love a Hellcat, that's why I got this one. It's an early production, 2015. So I get its place in history, but the reality is that you drive an old car, you never are more aware of your driving experience than when you have a 4,300 pound truck with practically no transmission to speak of going 60 miles an hour down the road, and you go to avoid a pothole with steering that can only be compared to that of a barge in terms of speed and responsiveness. Yeah, it gets your attention real quick. But it's fun. And I'll tell you something, 65 or 75 or 80 miles an hour in that truck feels like 150 miles an hour in my Hellcat. So this is what I was talking about you've got to get back into having fun. You've got to get back into having dumb fun at some point, because hyper fast and blowing through tires at 70 miles an hour, like literally, black patching going down the freeway, yeah, that's whatever. But especially when you have to have drag tires of some sort just to keep the thing safe and sane on the freeway if you need to throttle it out. Okay, great. That's a fun thing to talk about. But damn, when you're talking about something that and all it has is lap belts, and I'm lucky to have that. And you got the gas tank is right behind you, and it's just every time you go around a corner really hard, you got gas coming out of the gas cap. These are things that people dealt with and lived with like every day of their life. It was like a thing. They didn't even notice it. That's what makes these things so much fun, these older vehicles. And so, speed and fast and all of that. Yeah, it's fun. I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit jaded in that respect because I've driven the really fast stuff. Guys, I've driven 4 guys. And guys are, man, I don't have any experience with something this fast. Can you run down the track? So, yeah, sure. It's what we do for customers. And I would get the nod because I live at the drag strip. So why not have me run it, right? So, you end up getting all this experience with all this really fast stuff. And to be honest with you, it all kind of feels the same. The Coyote stuff is a riot because it's, it comes on so hard on the big end. The Mopar stuff is a ball to drive, and they're just, it's such a rich driving experience because it's all this torque and all this thrust down low. But so it's fun, it's neat, that's a neat experience. But dude, get behind the wheel of something that weighs 4,300 pounds. Basically needs a rudder instead of a steering wheel. Everything's kind of mushy. And if you need to do something like fast, you need to have planned this out already, because by the time you need to do it, it's too late. So anyway, that's part of the fun of having something like that. And, there's some construction areas over here, and there's some spots where on the concrete part where it'll come up. It's a bit of an off-camber turn to the left, and it's coming off of a bridge, mind you, at that. And so there's all the, anyway, so this was literally today. This was like no more than about 4 hours ago. So I'm driving the truck just because I can, and I don't have a transmission to speak of, so I can't watt and do anything. It'll just flash it like it's got a huge converter. So I've got to really keep my foot just right on the throttle to make sure that I'm not, blowing through the clutches on the transmission. I've got an X5 behind me. I've got this big ass chunk missing out of the road. I've got this off-camber corner turn thing coming up that's part of another bridge that you've got to, anyway, I'm flying across this thing 65 miles an hour. Truck gets a little bit light, and keep in mind, I still have to do cab, I still have to do the cab supports. I got to do all that. So the cab kind of shifts a little bit on the frame. Chilling, loving it, man. This truck rides like a Cadillac. Long bed. Anyway, hit this thing, kind of come up around, go around the downside of it. And I mean, you're turning this thing, and you got to keep your eye on the horizon. You got to keep looking. It's just a freaking riot. And nothing's really hanging with me, at least the X5 that was so, frisky about getting around me at one point, kind of holding back a little bit. So it was just a freaking riot. And I mean, it's making the squeaks and it's rattling around and it's doing all this other stuff. And I can't go watt, because if I do, I'll blow the transmission completely apart, I'm sure. And I'm just having a ball. And that's the fun part about having something like that. I wasn't even going 70. I was going 65. But it was the fact that, all of this is going on in this contraption that until you can experience something like that, fast is relative. And let me tell you something, 60, 70 miles an hour in that truck, again, feels double the speed in one of these modern cars. Anyway, back to it. Cody Boss is saying, any mod suggestions for a 4.7 2003 Durango? Not really, man. That's a Mercedes engine, that 4.7. Tune is about as far as I would take that. Pedal Commander, if you want to throw one of those in there, but that would be, oh wait, is that a cable? Tune for sure. Exhaust, if you want to spend the money on it, but that's about as far as I would take it. I wouldn't really try to take it too much further than that. Bob Fish saying, I love the whine when you crack that kitty's throttle. Absolutely, me too. Ken saying turbos are like two strokes. They can be, especially when it starts smoking them if you don't have your return lines flowing properly. Chris is saying, I think you mentioned a while back, but that Pikes has a Bravo package for the 6-speed Hellcats. Could you explain that a bit? Will it make the car more raw like a GT500? Thumbs up. Yeah, so we do have the Bravo package. So the Bravo package is basically about as far as you can take a stock supercharger. So you're looking at 10% lower, 275 upper. You're looking at a 4-fuel system. You're looking at injectors, tuning. Probably would suggest a can't delete, but that's really about as far as you need to go to get the most out of that stock supercharger in a very reliable platform, package too, for the platform that we're talking about. So now, can you go faster than that? Well, yeah. I mean, you can port the supercharger. That'll pick you up about anywhere between 15 and 25 horsepower. But from there, if you go more than a 275, I would say, yeah, go ahead and get the snout ported. And you can seriously start to make some power at that point. You're looking at, on a Mustang dyno, somewhere between 800 and 850 to the rear wheels, depending on how aggressive you want to get with that supercharger. You can go 265. Don't really suggest going 255. I know guys that have done it, but I would not go more than a 10 lower with a 265 upper. So, but 10 lower with a 275 upper is a proven, strong running, very fun package. And aside from, a drive shaft upgrade, if you're going to be taking the thing down the drag strip, I would wholeheartedly recommend axles at that point. If you're going to be on a drag strip, for sure. We've had them live, but that's with automatics. Manual, probably not so much. But let me tell you what it does do for the manual. I have said this, and I'm on record as saying this. The manual Hellcat is and can be a little bit lackluster to drive because it's got that 220 whatever first gear. With the extra torque offered up by that Bravo package, it livens it up like you would not believe. And it becomes a fun car to drive. One of my favorite things to do, we had some customers that, you know, this is long-term storage type of a situation, you would think. Basically, they would just say, take them out and exercise them. Guys that were overseas, working overseas, waiting to get back into town to grab their cars. One of the more fun cars to take out was one of the Bravo 6-speed cars. Not that, you know, anybody's out beating the hell out of customer cars or anything, far from it. But you get them out, run the car, you know, put it through a heat cycle, data log it just to have data on the back end of, you know, because it's good to have data. I swear every time. So my thing was every time I drove a car, I swear I should have had a lab coat on it. A lot of you guys have heard me say that before. I mean, it was just data log after data log after data log, cruising data log, partial throttle acceleration data log, wide open throttle data log, high RPM data log, low RPM data log, checking low speed spark knock. Anyway, fun, but it's, you know, it's only fun when you're talking about it. It's not a lot of fun when you're constantly, you know, worried about, you know, one specific parameter that you're shooting for. Anyway, sorry, squirrel. The point is, yes, if you're thinking about doing anything to your manual car, at bare minimum, a tune with a 295 upper pulley is what I would suggest. And I would also suggest that that is a mandatory modification for that car, in that you need something to liven that thing up down low. Had a lot of fun with those cars, really enjoyed driving them, never ran them hard on the street, never took them down the drag strip, just driving them, just as a conveyance to get from here to there, just as something to data log, just for something to row the gears in. Very fun car to drive. Chris is asking, how much horsepower could you expect? Hopefully I answered that one. Somewhere around 150 to 200 to the rear wheels is what you'll pick up with that. Bob Fish is saying, I am guessing my chiller for the supercharger does not add any horsepower, rather it just prevents some loss in power at higher ambient temperatures and heat of the engine. Fantastic question, my man. So actually, no, if you're talking about your intercooler, it absolutely does add power, in that it is extracting a lot of heat. In fact, quite a bit of bandwidth in the computer, if you want to think of it this way, is eaten up with things that are called spark modifiers. These are things that where you take your base wide open throttle map or your base timing map, those are affected by a significant number of what are known as spark modifiers. So in other words, if-then statements. If there is a temperature above X, in this case, as we get closer to, say, 212 degrees of engine coolant temperature, then we will start to remove timing. Or if we're looking at intake air temperature or manifold temperature, at this temperature, it'll start to remove timing. So not only does it help to add power in that it's lowering the temperature of the inlet of the charged air coming into the engine, but it is keeping the same amount of timing where it needs to be to make optimal torque at that RPM. So yes, you're right in that it allows you to maintain the power you would have had if it were lost, that would be lost if you didn't have it. But without it, you couldn't run the boost at all. So you wouldn't have had the power to lose to begin with. Anyway, hopefully that answers the question, but good comment and very, very on point for the topic tonight. Very well done, sir. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Ken, thank you very much. I appreciate the contribution to the cause. And then Mankey's in, very nice. Thank you very much. Appreciate that contribution to the channel, man. Thank you for the support. I truly appreciate that. And B5 Beast checking in. Damn, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Said I really like the stock exhaust sound of my 2016 Challenger Hellcat. Considering no ease diverters for when I want loud. Any danger of having them wide open while revving and heavy accelerating? None whatsoever, bud. Don't worry about them one bit. Man, I appreciate that, guys. Thank y'all very much for the support. I truly appreciate it. Minky, I didn't see a question with yours. And Ken, thank you very much. Man, I appreciate that. Let's see. Let me get back over here. But thank y'all very much. HU37 saying, I like GM's approach to a Cadillac gas gauge problem. Instead of fixing it, they added a trap door so you can swap out the gas gauge easily. I like it. Ruben saying, hey, B-Mac, what's going on? Would you mind telling me how much boost Revlon is running? Revlon is running stock boost. So in really crappy air, 10.5-ish. And in really good air, 11.5-ish. If you're looking at KPA, which is kilopascals, you would be looking at 170 kilopascals in crappy air and as much as 183 kilopascals. Normal ambient air is going to be around 100 kilopascals. So take 14.7, which is your ambient PSI. We know that 100 is your base, so you take the number above your base. In this case, let's say 70. You would take that as 70% of 100, take 14.7, multiply it by 0.7, and that will give you roughly the boost that it's making in crappy air. It's a little math homework for you. Little tuning math for you. Get your mind all schooled up. Jake Cooley saying, what is the best way to launch a 500 horsepower car? Depends on where you're launching it. If you're at the drag strip and you're on a tire and the drag strip is prepped, 500 horsepower is pretty easy to launch with this weight. Now, a lighter weight car, definitely going to need a drag tire to get it to dead hook out of the hole. But my advice to guys has always been this. This is at the drag strip on a sticky tire. Could be a drag radial or ET Street R, something like that. It's really easy. And it's also kind of easy to illustrate. So take a walk, literally walk 10 to 15 feet in front of you. That cadence, that foot cadence, that amount of time when your heel hits the ground until your toe hits the ground, that's how I roll into the throttle. It's not like that. It's that there's no stutter, but the idea is as your foot touches, the amount of time that it takes you to roll forward on just a normal walking cadence, that's how I instruct guys to launch their cars. When I've got a customer that I am at the drag strip to get a number for them, like they say, I'm trying to run 9s, or I'm trying to get a 960 out of this thing. I'll get out there and I'll run the number for them, but I'll also try to instruct them on how to drive the cars. And most of them, that's about the cadence. Some of them, you've got to kind of feel it load up out of the hole. Some you can get a little bit more aggressive. Others you got to be a little bit slower. But it's that smooth transition, and the baseline, kind of the barometer for that is just a normal walking pace. Just going for a walk, just like you're going from your kitchen to your living room. That kind of an idea. Hopefully that helps. Jerry's saying, I know it's boost night, but I think I'd rather have a sub 10-second NA 392, especially when you'd be eating up stock Hellcats without the supercharger. Actually, it's fun in a way. So I used to go sniping after Hellcats with Shalandra, with that 392 SRT that I had. Keeping in mind that on the street, A 392 is incredibly difficult to mess with from a dig. There are very few cars that are going to be able to hang with a 392 on a tire on the street. So realistically, the 10-second aspect of the Hellcat kind of gets thrown out the window on the street, the more power that you make. Obviously, you start making a ton of power, you're going to start exceeding tire technology. And that's always been kind of the bigger twist here is, how much faster do you want to go? Well, it's all dependent. Eddie Lawson used to say this, he's an old motorcycle racer from way back in the day. And, you got 200 horsepower motorcycles back then. And how much faster can you go? Nobody will ever know. The tires can't carry it. Well, that's where we are now. You've got the Hellcat, which by rights on the freeway, you want one of these things, it's going to try to haze the tires on stock tires. It's one of the issues that you're going to run into. So, on the street, I used to go sniping after Hellcats. Now, sure, at some point they're going to get around me, but they're going to be staring at my taillights for just long enough to irritate them. And they've got to know how to drive. The very first time I ran I'm sorry. My very first Mopar Fest with that car, the very first car that I ran was a black Hellcat. And I smoked that Hellcat with my, supposed to be slowest of the group, SRT 392, of the 8-speed cars. Actually, that car turned out to be one of the quicker versions of that anybody had seen for a long time. Anyway, the point is that it's so difficult to say that, necessarily, a Hellcat can run 10s, but you've got to be on a tire, on a prep track. It's just too difficult to get the car to launch. You have to drive the Hellcat to get it there. And that's really what separates the Hellcat and the Red Eye from the GT500, frankly, is that you don't have to know how to drive to launch a GT500. You've got to drive a Hellcat out of the hole. And that's just all there is to it. Let's see, HU37 saying ProCharger makes, was it an I1 programmable supercharger? You end up with a computer-controlled gearbox providing the boost that can ramp up at different rates, available for Stings, Camaros, and Vets. Is that the electric one? I know that there's a lot of development going into the 48-volt systems to generate enough power to run an e-supercharger. That's something, I think Audi's got one. A few folks have got one. There's some issues with the actual the speed controller, the voltage capacities, things like that. But that is something that is coming. And you can dial in whatever boost whenever you want it within the limits of the compressor, which is pretty cool, with none of the parasitic loss, with the only real understanding that you've got to charge capacitors and a battery after each pull. So it's not like it's always there, but it's kind of always there. I mean, it's just, it has to recharge. So it's kind of a hybrid, like a cyborg type system. Kind of cool though. Again, Ken, thank you very much. Saying, would love to see a chat on how you make your perfect launches. Man, I got to tell you, a lot of it has to do with track prep and just a lot of practice. Proper technique with the burnout goes a long way with this. In fact, I would say that half of it, aside from the track prep, the other half of this, in terms of how to launch the car, has everything to do with just positioning the car properly at the burnout. You'd be surprised how these guys will actually try to do their burnout in the water box. It's like, guys, that's not why that water box is there. You end up soaking the inside of the fender well. You know, this spot right here, you end up soaking the entire fender well with water, ends up dripping all over the place, and it causes problems. Man, it causes all kinds of problems for trying to get the thing to launch. Anyway, you get where I'm going with this. You see it all the time. So a lot, again, staging the car properly, and then properly rolling into the throttle at the launch. Those are the big ones, but none of that means anything if the track sucks. And, you know, with these modern fast-ass cars, you've got to have a track that'll hold it. All right, let's see. Donald saying, what's the most short-term knock acceptable? For a Hellcat, I'll put it to you like this. The stock Hellcat, you'll see 2 to 3 degrees of short-term knock. That's normal. That's what you'll normally see. Any of the Mopars, it is not at all uncommon to see 2 to 3 degrees of short-term knock across the board. The main thing is looking at the knock sensor voltage. You don't want to see, realistically, you don't want to see anything more than about 3 volts on those knock sensors. That would be for sure, or at least coming up on for sure, actual knock. I've seen in some instances where race gas in a Hellcat will actually kill all the short-term knock in that thing. That kind of is true. I've noticed that it depends on the mix, but I typically don't like to see more than a couple of degrees. I will kind of question with my tune if I see more than a couple of degrees, mainly because I know what my air fuel is and I know what I've done with my knock sensor voltage. So then it comes into a question of, well, okay, how much have I messed with my knock sensor voltage? And what is that going to translate into in terms of short-term knock retard? So you got to remember, you can make adjustments with the tune and not touch knock sensor voltage and still get 2 to 3 degrees of short-term knock retard. You can pick up some power and you'll still see that short-term knock retard. You have to get the false knock out of this system. And to do that, well, it quite honestly, it depends on what you're comfortable with. A lot of tuners will chop them down by about 40%. Makes sense. I don't chop mine down that far. At least not across the board. I'll kind of ramp it up a little bit, but I like to keep them a little bit soft around peak torque. If you're going to get knock, that's where you're going to get real knock, is around peak torque or at throttle transitions. In other words, going from just barely partial throttle to like into, more throttle demand, in other words, more driver demand torque. That's where you're going to see that short-term knock retard. That's and low speed spark knock, which is really what does the most damage to these things. So what's the most that I like to see? Couple of degrees is normal. That's fine. 2.5, getting there. If I see 3, I'm pretty sure something's gone awry. Probably going to tell me that's a fuel quality issue, and that's when all the fun stops. And I really start to raise that eyebrow around that 2.5 volt mark. But I really don't throw out the anchor until 2.8, 2.7. And then into 3 for sure, on a tuned car. And again, that's really more a function of true fuel quality than anything else. Hopefully that answers the question. But again, that's also assuming that, I also know what I've done with my knock sensors. So it's a weird, hopefully I answered that the right way for you. So stock, don't be surprised if you see 3. I've even seen 4 in some cars. And that's in a bone stock car. Stock, not modified in any way. Modified cars, typically you'll see a lot less, but there's reasons for that. Zephyr saying, thank you, sir. Have you seen any proper stock style wide body flares? Not really. I found a guy that is and has done those, the aftermarket, along with Hellcat hood and front bumper. And the 18-inch Demon wheels. Very cool. Chris is also asking, do wide body Hellcats have upgraded drive shafts? No. I know that's considered the Achilles heel for challengers, kind of. But the newer drive shafts are better. I've got a buddy of mine that's rocking a stock drive shaft with his carts running, deep into the tens. No big deal. He's also not, launching it at, crazy numbers, or not launching it off a trans brake or something like that. So that's something to consider. But yeah, it can be a bit of an Achilles heel. But my very good friend, Multiple Mopars, hooked me up with that red-eye drive shaft for this thing, and not looking back after that. So the 309 red eyes have the same drive shaft that the Demons do. A little bit more robust, a little bit heavier, but I haven't seen any real detriment in 60 foot time. But the 262 Hellcats do not have anything different than their 262 red eye cousins or brothers or sisters, whatever. HU37 saying the problem I would have with a turbo under the car is sucking water in a rainstorm. Me too. Not to mention just stuff. I mean, you run something over, it's going to get baked onto your turbo. It's just going to get gross. Not to mention it's something hanging underneath your car. I mean, it's not like it's hanging underneath the car. You know what I'm talking about. It's just not what I would want underneath my car. 1320 looks like he's checking out, saying, thanks, B. Till next time. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Zephyr R&D saying, I'm curious if doing the wide body hood bumper 305s, 315, KW coilovers, and Gatrag 370 would bring a new life to the 6.1 NAG1 SRT. Not sure on the Gatrag due to the amount of highway we drive. Actually, 370s on the highway are not bad. You've got an overdrive transmission. So, I mean, I was running 373s and Mustangs for years and years and years and years and years. In fact, I used to use those as work cars. My work vehicles were all 5-speed Mustang GTs with 373 gears. They were practically indestructible, bomb-proof in terms of reliability. And fun to drive. But yeah, that was my work car. And so I've got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of miles underneath me with that combination. Johnny's checking out with Jay. Let's see. JT3 saying, thanks for the advice. I have installed an SLP loudmouth 2-cat back, a 392 gear, and have the Cooks 1 7/8 long tube headers with high flow catted pipes. What cold air do you think, and three others you think I should do? Oh, well, you guys know I'm not that big on cold airs, but I like JLT. So I would look at JLT and Leg Maker would be the two, really the only two that I would offer up. Mopar makes a nice one as well. So if you're looking for three, in no particular order, JLT, Leg Maker, and Mopar for your combination. But you've got some great parts on there. The Kooks 1 7/8, hands down the best headers. No doubt about it. 392 will wake it up, make it a lot of fun. So, yeah, I think you're in good shape. Keep rocking, brother. Catalyst 909 saying, if you buy a 5.7 and then upgrade to a 400 stroker, will that be the same power as a 392? Only if you're looking at an intake swap, cam swap, and all the rest of the things that go along with it. Actually, it should make a little bit more power than a 392. But there's some things to consider. Number one, which intake manifold are you going to run? Are you going to run with a 6.1? Are you going to convert a 6.4, which would be my suggestion, to work with your combination, which is to say you would need a window switch set to around 4,900 RPM to activate the short runners. Or would you want to go with something more along the lines of the Edelbrock? So there are some things to consider while you're looking at, just the power numbers. There's some supporting mods that you're going to have to carry along with you to really make those things work properly. So short answer to that is it'll probably make more because you're going to be going with a more aggressive camshaft. Although I will warn you, don't get nutty with your camshaft. Even on the 400s, 426s, whatever. More is not necessarily better when you've got heads that flow as much as our heads flow. Going with like a 230 cam or something like that's a bad idea. You're going to have a bad time. You're going to want to stay with something less than about 224 and pick something that is going to be fun and that is going to take advantage of the extra cubic inches that you've got. So, and a little bit of buyer beware on that too. Just because you've thrown the kitchen sink at a combination, if you don't get the combination right, it's going to be tough to compare it to a 392. Main reason here is that the 392 is real snappy. You're going to need to watch your compression ratio. That's going to be a big part of that. So don't go into this with some little 10-to-1 400 and think that you're going to get the same type of results. Not when you're going up against an 11-to-1 392. 392 is no joke, man. Motor makes a bunch of giddy up. So build the combination right and you'll make more. Donald Power saying perfect launch, below wheel spin, and above bog. Old school, absolutely. But the thing is, it takes time. You've got to get the technique down. And I can show you over and over again. That's why I try to show guys. I'll literally make them walk next to me. I'll say, watch my right foot. Watch the cadence. Feel the cadence. Feel your foot doing the same thing my foot's doing. I'll literally make them walk. And we'll walk up and down the pit row. I mean, or the staging lanes rather, or in the pits. Just this is how you do this. And they'll get it. I mean, it just takes a little bit of time. But I can show you, but I can't do it for you. It's just one of those types of things. Let's see. Lone Wolf Custom saying, I really don't like people on meth, so I really don't want my car on meth. That's funny. Hey, one other thing you got to remember about meth, guys. You guys that have had questions about meth and boost, remember that meth has a lower molecular weight than a hydrocarbon. What does that mean? It means it gets around those rings and can potentially contaminate the oil faster than gasoline. It's also a reason why if you're running ethanol, you need to be changing your oil much more often, like twice as often. But that's one of the things about, running high volumes of methanol, especially when it doesn't, or when it comes out of atomization and starts to puddle up. It's just another series of just things you got to deal with when you're dealing with meth. Let's see. SRT Charger is saying, my 2011 Challenger, what kind of differential does it have? Any slip or limited slip? What does that mean? 392. Oh, okay. So the 392 is, in this case, when we're talking about gears, 3.92 rear end. It is the rear end that would be found in manual transmission 6.4 liter, which is also a 392 cubic inch. Just a coincidence, no correlation here. But it's the rear end that is in the manual cars. So they've got a much more aggressive gear in those cars than the automatics do, because the automatics have such aggressive transmission gear ratios. Your 2011 Challenger, what kind of diff does it have? It probably has, if it's an SRT, it'll have a 309 Gay-Trag rear end with no slip. If it is a 5.7, it might have a 2.62. The 262 was actually a very popular gear on the Mercedes side, which is where our platforms are derived from. In fact, my E63 had a 262 in it also. Kind of give you an idea for some of the history, if that helps you. But that will not be a no slip. Mankey saying, Catalyst, there is a guy here on YouTube that goes by RT Life who did cam exhaust, intake stroke to 396, making 435 to the ground. Yeah, he did, which is right on par with what a real healthy 392 will make. Shawnee is saying, just picked up a 94 North Star 4.6 Caddy, way too quiet. 3-chamber floor masters for more sound. Your thoughts? Shit, yeah, man. I say go for it. Actually, North Stars sound really good with exhaust. The small displacement V8s always sound so good. Y'all know my two favorite sounding engines are the Windsor 5 liter with Flowmasters and the 4.6 liter 2 valve. Man, listen, let me tell you something. The 4.6 with a set of 373s flows, dude, that is a damn good sounding car. I don't care how slow it is. I don't care if you call it slow, call it fast, whatever. Man, get me on some just old, service roads with that car. I'll be tearing some shit up. Shawnee is saying, Shawnee's saying that's still less than I was making my 392 with long tube headers in a tune. It depends on the dyno, though. Shawnee's saying at 4,300 pounds, your GMC truck is very similar to weight to the Hellcat. What horsepower does your truck need to get it into your fun zone? It's already there, man. I mean, that truck, I can't even have fun with it because the transmission doesn't work right, and it's already kind of there. And like I said, the story I was telling you earlier, man, that's all real shit. That's all stuff that happened today, like, 4 or 5 hours ago. So, but what am I going to do with it? It'll be hovering somewhere around the 430 horsepower range. Basically a pound for every 10 horsepower. Or I'm sorry. A horsepower for every 10 pounds. A pound for every 10 horsepower. That haul ass. But no, I think you know what I'm talking about. Something that's just kind of fun to play with. The only thing that truck has to do is just ride good, which it does because it's a long bed, and light the tires up. That's all I care about that truck doing. Sliding that thing around and just goofing off in general, that's the only things that truck has got to do to keep me very, very happy. And, if it runs if it's got power enough to be the equivalent to, I don't know, say a mid 13, I don't know, a mid 14, whatever. Let's say 14.0 to 13.5. That truck would be nutty, but it would never run that number because I'd be too busy laughing my ass off at just how far I can lay rubber with it. So that's the fun thing. So somewhere around 375 to 425. You got to remember it's a 400 small block, so that torque number is going to be significantly higher than what it would normally be in like a 350. So you're looking at, instead of 420 foot-pounds of torque, you'd be looking at more like 460 foot-pounds of torque out of my 400. So let's see. Yarmar Jaeger is saying, I have an SRT8 Charger with a 426 stroker, big cam, mall pistons, 392 injectors. Let's see. Got a catback 13.1 compression, heads, fuel. Should I change the throttle body? Well, man, let me tell you something. If you're that deep into this thing and you're wondering if you should change the throttle body, yeah, I would say probably a good idea. But in the meantime, what are you talking about with you've got 392 injectors? What SRT8 are you running? What do you mean by big cam? There's a lot of stuff going on here that's tough to dissect. And the reason why I say all of that is you're talking about running 13-to-1 compression. That is unbelievably high for a vehicle that is that heavy on pump gas. So I would say first and foremost, what kind of fuel are you running? And if you're asking, should you change the throttle body out? I would say, yeah. If you're talking about a SRT8 Charger, I'm guessing, and you're saying 392 injectors, are you talking about it's an older Charger with the 6.1 intake on it? I'd say, yeah, switch it over to a Hellcat, and but you're going to need to have it ported out to make it work. Shawnee's saying, I'm old enough to remember when people would drive around with rags for gas caps. Damn right. I remember that very well. And they did it for two reasons. One was to try to quell vapor lock, and two, most of the time it's because the gas cap fell off. Johnny's saying, so you're saying that GMC needs a turn slip indicator. I'm saying that GMC needs, yes, it does. That would be a lot of fun to do too. Plus the steering is real slow in that truck. So when you want to make changes, you got to be in it. You got to really want to make changes. Ken saying it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow. The dilemma of today's cars. Absolutely, it is. HU37 saying, I was born in the 50s, a car that with windows where you can hear the wind, rattles everywhere, smelling raw fuel, and driving a car that handles like an iceberg are things that I don't miss. Man, I'll tell you what, I'm having too much fun with this thing, man. And Sean saying cars with no brakes. Again, thank you, B5 Beast. So the thing is, the truck's got pretty decent brakes, all things considered. It is a power brake truck. And that's another reason why I like the 3/4 ton. It comes with big brakes. So, another reason to love 3/4 ton Chevys and GMCs from back then. Christian saying, awesome. If I get a Hellcat after school, I'll be contacting Pites about that package. Thanks a ton. You got it, brother. Yeah, I would highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun to drive. Bob Fish saying, so is it kosher to run the chiller at the track, considering it uses the AC and afraid of leaking condensation on the track? Actually talking about the drag strip. It's fine. I mean, look at Racer X, Paul Moody. We put just the standard killer chiller on his, and he'll make a pass and on the return road, just run the chiller all the way back to the staging lanes or the pit. Ben Waiton's got the thumbs up and the peace. Thank you much. Hemi saying, I reached out to Alex about doing remote tuning on the Scat Pack. Do you use a wideband AFR for your data logging? If so, permanent or temporary mounted? It depends. On the Hellcat, it's got wide bands, so I can just run everything off of the Hellcat. The other ones don't have that, and I did both. Actually, it depends on the car. So some of them had permanently mounted AFR gauges that I would use. Others, we would hook up a separate air fuel meter to the car. You have all the wires running around, look like freaking Back to the Future, into the car. But no, we've run them with both, and it usually works out pretty well. The fueling typically isn't the issue, though. Getting the fueling knocked out is pretty easy to do, as long as the initial data looks good. And realistically, the data that you're going to find under closed loop is going to be pretty good. A lot of it, though, is getting the timing dialed in. If it's a big cam and high altitude, getting the VE table sorted out. That's the other issue. But aside from that, a lot of these cars, fairly well-known values for fueling, so you're never going to be too far off the mark. The only time fueling really becomes an issue is if the customer, and you're doing a remote tune, is if the customer is running long tube headers. Long tube headers are the scourge of a tuner's existence, because what happens is that they leak, and the oxygen that is infiltrating the system in between exhaust pulses will cause the computer to think that the car is basically like it's running lean, and so it starts to throw fuel at it. So that's something that you'll see. You'll see the fuel trim's way off on one of the banks. That's first question you ask is, okay, what kind of long tubes are you running? And if it's, no name brand, a long tube, chances are they're leaking. It's rare to have a set of Cooks leak, and that's why, again, they're not paying me. But fit and finish when it comes to that type of an exhaust is real important. Like, on my old GMC, doesn't really matter so much, but on something that is very, very determinate, its outcomes are extremely precise, and they rely heavily on those sensors to do their job. That's where it really makes a difference. Let's see. Bear with me. Time out. I just screwed up. Let's see. Herbert's saying, do you need a tune on a 2013 SRT8 to add a cold air kit? No, man, not at all. Love the channel. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. No, you do not need a tune to add a cold air at all. You will be in good shape. Alex is asking, do you technically have to inform your insurance company if you modify your car? I figure it would cost me less in insurance if I modded my 392 versus trading it to a Hellcat. No, you don't have to, I don't think technically. I mean, you do if you want to be reimbursed if something happens to the vehicle. But aside from that, no, you're not obligated to tell them anything. You just won't be reimbursed for any of it. Kenneth Samet is saying, and people don't have front runners rolling through the box. Yeah, that's another thing. Guys running through the water box on street tires, like they're wide, normal, going to work tires. Let's see. Mankey's asking, Alex, depending on the year of the car, it could decrease. My insurance for the first Challenger 12 SXT was about $60 more than my current. Gotcha. and he's 21, so yeah, your insurance is going to be brutal either way. HE3 saying that the i1 not electric supercharger, the ratios are programmable, works like expansion pulleys to change ratios, has different modes like street race and user defined. I'd love to see it. I'll have to check it out. Let's see. Raul Ramirez saying, what's up, B? Did you ever race a C7 Corvette LS2 with your 392? Yeah, I did. In fact, I ran into a guy with a convertible going down the freeway one night, and we were dead even, door handle to door handle on the freeway at the drag strip. Wasn't close, man. I mean, the C7 was actually pretty easy pickings at the drag strip. They just don't launch as hard as the Mopars. Now, once they get rolling, they will start to reel you in a little bit at about mid-track, but I never had one go around me. And that was evidenced by the one that I ran on the highway. It was like I said, we hit it and it was door handle to door handle. It's whoever got the jump was going to be out first. And yeah, it's got an LT1. Let's see. C6 Corvette? No, I wouldn't even. I ran a ton of C6 Corvettes with that car, manual transmission primarily. The best races for my white car were manual transmission, heads cam, exhaust, intake, C6 Corvettes. Here's the reason why. At the end of the quarter mile, we would both run identical numbers. So let's say that I ran an 11.8. That vet would run an 11.8, but I might run an 11.8 at 116 or 117, and that vet would break the traps at like 122, 123. And so all the way down the track, I would just annihilate them out of the hole. But they would start reeling me in like a 2-pound trout all the way down the track. And the closest margin of victory was 1,000th of a second that I got on a C6 in just that trim. And he was on me, coming up and around me right as we went through the traps, and I got him by 1,000th of a second, and our reaction times were practically identical. So really good racing, but that was the fun pairing was heads cam, intake, manual transmission, C6 Corvettes. Let's see. Donnie's asking, do you prefer a 6.1 or 6.4 manifold for an NA setup? It depends on what it's going into. If it's going into like a resto mod, like a truck or what have you, in that respect, I'd go 6.1 manifold. But if I'm looking to make outright just more power, then I'm going to go with that 6.4 manifold. The 6.1 will actually do really well through the mid-range. Because it's not a variable manifold. I will say this, it is more complicated to go with the 6.4 though. So just know that coming into it. And just by that right there, I would, start leaning more and more towards the 6.1. Again, it depends on what it's going into. Alex is asking, hey, D, what are the durability longevity issues associated with doing a stroker kit, whether NA or boosted? You know, some guys will argue rod to stroke ratio at this point, just how much side loading is going on and what's known as egging a cylinder. A perfect example of that is my 400. It's arguably one of the worst in terms of rod to stroke ratios. But anyway, getting to it, that would be the only real point of concern for me. I wouldn't really want to run a 440 long-term on the street, but a 426 I probably wouldn't have much of an issue with. The 392, by the way, is about at the limit for what some folks consider to be long-term streetable, long-term warrantable. I know that the 454 has got a funky rod to stroke ratio, and yeah, there's other engines out there that have been funkier from the factory, but for what we're doing with these cars, yeah, stick with what works. 426s would be fine. Just make sure you stay on top of your maintenance. And also with the understanding that you're going to be wailing on the thing a little bit more because it's a performance engine and it's not like you're just going to be, you know, driving this thing across country or, you know, you get the idea here. I mean, we all know what we're up to, right? So in that respect, 392 is really good. But again, I just wouldn't, I probably wouldn't go 440, but 426 would be about as far as I would go. And as far as that's concerned, if you're maintaining it, it'll last every bit as long as a very well-maintained 392. I wouldn't worry about that too much. Hector is asking, what about a propane injected 392 Hemi? Just spitballing ideas. Propane would be fine provided you can feed it enough propane. But I would say that you would be remiss because of the octane rating of propane being significantly higher. You'd probably want to play with a little bit higher compression ratio if you really wanted to get the most out of it. It's kind of the same argument about E85, except in this case, you're dealing with a gas, which is a lot easier to manage in some ways in that engine than, you know, just pumping more and more E85 into the engine where it displaces oxygen. So just some things to consider there. Let's see. Oh, JQ3 saying, sorry, I wasn't clear. What are 3 other mods you think I should do to my 09 Challenger besides long tubes, catback, 392 gear, and cold air intake? I think you're pretty well on the way to a cam at this point. I mean, you pretty much have done everything you can do. You know, and at that point, it's all about what you want to get out of the car. Now, I will say that you're at some point, you probably want to have, new valve seats installed in those heads if you're really going to be wailing on the thing. If you're planning on going with a power adder, it'll be a must. The earlier Hemis were kind of known for having valve seat issues, so just something to have, you know, in the kitty, so to speak. You know, something to think about along the way. But I would say a cam at that point, get the valve seats reworked while the cam's getting done, and then maybe hit it with about 100 shot. I think you'd be in pretty good shape. Let's see. Lil Wolf is saying, I've been researching about putting an 8 3/4 in my 06 Dodge Charger. What gear you think would be good with a 5.7 and a 904? 5.7 and a 904, which is a 3-speed. I don't know. Go with a 354. I think that's what I would go with. You say you think about going 370-ish. Might be a little bit much, but yeah, 354 or 370 be a good route to go. Be a little bit buzzy on the freeway with a 370, but not too bad. Slash Rose saying Racer X told me to go through Summit Racing for the front runners. For my Scat Pack 6-piston Brembos, he mentioned you had the same exact ones. Can you tell me the part number? I cannot remember the part number of those Dark Stars to save my life, but they are the 18-inch Dark Star. Let's see. F. Cho saying, B. Mace, hope all is well, brother. Congrats on the new truck. I've got a 6-speed Hellcat. So about that Bravo package, what kind of power torque increase does it typically put up? If the car puts down around 600 to the wheels on a Mustang dyno with the Bravo package, look for about 800 to the rear wheels, give or take. So, you know, anywhere between 787 and 812 is what I've seen. But, you know, dynos can be a little bit fickle. So they're all going to be right around that mean 800 horsepower to the rear wheel number on a Mustang dyno. Bob Fish is saying, I heard there's an adapter for the Hellcat stock upper pulley that would add a few pounds of boost and 40-50 horsepower without any tune. Any thoughts? Horrific idea. It's not an adapter. What it is, it's a separate pulley. It's still an uncoupling pulley, which is really good. But the reality is that there's no such thing as a smaller pulley that doesn't need a tune, at least not down here. Now, if you're up in high altitudes, like say you live in the high desert in Arizona, or you're up in, you know, the cliche, you know, somewhere in Colorado. If you're up in higher altitude, say, for example, if you live at 2,000 feet, you may not need a tune. But don't try to play that down here near the coast. What happens is, at the lower altitudes, when it gets cold down here, we go into negative DA. When I say we get negative, we get deep into negative, like negative 1,000 feet, negative 1,200, negative 1,500. You know, you try to play that game over at ATCO where it gets down to negative 2,500. You know, you're going to really start seeing some issues. I'll put it to you like this. Down here, I know Dr. Diff has data logged a Hellcat with, I want to say he's seen both of them. He's seen the Incognito, which is the lower, I think, and I'm almost positive that he's seen the that Hellraiser pulley. What the fuck was that? Anyway, the Hellraiser pulley, which is the one that you're talking about. In both cases, the cars were yanking 5, 7, 8 degrees of short-term knock retard. That's real knock retard. Not sure what the voltage was at the knock sensors, but suffice it to say, it was pretty high. I think it was cresting 3 volts. So when I say it's not a good idea, just understand that at lower altitudes, it can potentially be a significant problem. But I can tell you this, I've gone quicker with my stock pulleys in really good DA than the press cars and have gone with that Hellraiser pulley. But again, I'm able to utilize the Mother Nature mod, and that's really kind of more to the point. So anyway, buyer beware. This is where knowing your physical environment, knowing your, you know, like I say, your ambient environment can save you. And I like I say, I'll tell you this, you try to run that kind of pulley down here in really low DAs, you're going to be replacing a lot more than, well, you might be replacing an engine. I'll put it to you like that. Down here anyway. Just be careful is all I can tell you. Shawnee's checking out. Good night, bro. Symphonic saying, buddy has a stock 392 auto. If I run him at the strip with my Gen 2 Coyote manual 373 with CAI catback exhaust with a very good Lund 93 tune, do I come around him on the top end? Yes, you should. But he is going to still give you a fit coming out of the hole. So you're going to have to gun him down. And that is not a guaranteed win. But I will tell you that be confident that you will run him down on the big end. Symphonic saying both on street tires, you'll have a bit of an advantage on the launch if both of them are on street tires. And then Kevin Collins asking, hey, how helpful would NAG1 overdrive help at highway speeds with a 370 gears? I guess you're asking about what the RPM would be. At say 70 to 80, I'd say 80 miles an hour, you'd probably be sitting at about 2,700 RPM. 70 miles an hour, you'd be sitting at about 2,300-ish RPM, somewhere around in there. So not bad on the freeway. And with that, guys, I am going to wrap it up. We are just over 2 hours long. I wanted to say thank you to everybody that was able to hang out with us tonight. Guys, y'all stay safe out there. Thank you all very much for hanging out with me. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. God bless. And that is a wrap Adios.